are many different things that make any given regular show episode great. It's a show that can be consistently funny with its physical gags and vocal deliveries, a show that can be consistently clever with its references and callbacks, and a show that can be consistently captivating with its terrific character dynamics and loose serialization. But there's one episode that does all of this better than any other in the series, and it comes almost exactly in the middle of the show with the 4th season finale, Me Amadeus. In this video, we're going to go through all 11 minutes and break down how all of these elements come together to create the perfect episode.
Hey girl, I want you to be my everything.
Hey girl, why are you talking to yourself, girl?
The opening montage of Me Amadeus is this unapologetically indie movie-esque montage of Margaret and Mordecai hanging out, which besides just mirroring the indie movie-esque ending of the episode that we'll get to later, it also reinforces the idea that Margaret and Mordecai are pretty much practically already dating, which makes the cut to him stressing out about how he's going to ask her to be his girlfriend work really well comedically. While Mordecai is worried about how to deliver the question, the episode makes it clear from the beginning that it's not like Margaret is going to reveal that she doesn't like Mordecai, so by setting this up as the initial premise, the episode leaves the viewers on their toes for how this is going to go horrifically wrong. But before the suspense really kicks in, we get this conversation between Rigby and Mordecai that, besides some casual ribbing about Mordecai practicing to the mirror, features one of the least jerkish portrayals of Rigby in the entire series, as he voluntarily gives Mordecai his share of Pop's Amadeus dollars, which are coupons for Me Amadeus, the terrifically named restaurant that Mordecai is planning to take Margaret to. This gesture is in the name of brospect, a term coined by Rigby in this episode to describe the brotherly loyalty between the pair throughout the entire series, as this episode makes sure to keep the pair almost entirely non-confrontational. This scene is pretty short and quick, but it does do a good job in demonstrating the well-developed dynamic between the show's main characters that it's built up during the last 4 seasons, as the show transitions to Mordecai talking to Margaret on his way to the restaurant. The episode does another really fun thing where Mordecai receives the call that Margaret is running late, as while this does ultimately just become an excuse for her to not show up until the second half of the episode, it works really well here to set up the expectation that her coming late or not at all is going to be the main conflict of the episode, which eases the viewer as Mordecai tries to use the Amadeus dollars, as the episode does the classic normal to shenanigan cut that almost every episode in the show does, as Mordecai goes from checking into his reservation normally to being tackled by the FBI and put into the interrogation room within literally 10 seconds. The FBI agents that interrogate the gang are pretty clear parodies of Scully and Mulder from X-Files, but the parody never really overwhelms the episode as they remain one of the funniest parts of it. I really like how they handle every character in this episode, as while the entire gang does show up at this point, even Thomas, they all get their 1 or 2 moments in the episode before disappearing to allow the focus to fall back onto Mordecai and Margaret. The interrogation has some great moments throughout it too, like Pop crying over giving his friends the quote funny money, and how everybody treats Mordecai asking his already pretty much girlfriend to be his girlfriend as such a big deal. While treating goofy things as if they were serious is a pretty big staple for the show, this episode uses this gag to such great effect throughout the entire thing, as while the action builds up in its second half to Mordecai and Rigby meeting a mysterious man while being wired up, you somewhat start to forget the fact that this is entirely about counterfeit coupons. Besides just bringing back the fact that Rigby helps out Mordecai with his date because of brospect, which seems a bit weird at first considering that Rigby is also going to jail if they can't catch the actual guy, but whatever. I like that despite all the conspiracy stuff going on, that the episode still chooses to first do the whole Mordecai claims to go to the bathroom to actually attend the other engagement thing, as the episode mixes together all the things that it's parodying really well. Mordecai and Rigby trying to get the mysterious dollar dealer to spill the truth about the funny money is both really comedic and absurd, and I love both of their reactions when Margaret comes over and tries to tell Mordecai something. The seller getting more and more devious sounding before pulling out a gun makes for a nice moment of serious-esque tension in the episode, before he takes off the hat and reveals himself to be a familiar-looking animatronic bear.
It's that dice guy from the Fun Fun Zone!
Yep, exactly. He's that animatronic bear from Season 3's Fuzzy fuzzy dice, which is another really solid episode about the gang obtaining the titular dice, having them stolen by a mafia-esque gang of animatronics, and then chasing them down and ultimately having them blown up by the FBI. The episode handles this kind of callback in a perfect way, as while it does serve as a nice reward for keeping up with the show that fits really well in a season finale, it's also not necessary in any way, shape, or form to have seen the first episode in order to get this one, so it doesn't take away from the Mordecai and Margaret plot in the slightest. This episode does give us this hilariously long-winded and convoluted history of the bear leader in between appearances, as he reveals that he only started printing out counterfeit Amadeus dollars in order to get the Park Gang to buy them, which Rigby immediately points out the unnecessary effort in. What follows next seems like it'll just be the same kind of action ending that almost every episode in the entire series finishes with, but there are a couple of key differences that make this one especially great. Besides just being actively hilarious, with different members of the animatronic gang popping out and Muscle Man spinning and shooting being my favorite pair of gags, it also does something really interesting with how it chooses to focus so heavily on the conversation between Margaret and Mordecai during this section. One of my favorite ways that the episode achieves this effect of Mordecai only focusing on Margaret is with the sound design in this episode, as the gunfire in the background gets quieter and more muffled as he gets deeper into conversation, as he finally asks her to be his girlfriend, and how her sudden rejection on the basis of getting into her dream school is accompanied by a sudden loud gunshot as he's pretty shell-shocked. Both sides stopping shooting so that a sobbing Margaret can bail makes for a scene that's initially funny but ends up being surprisingly genuine as Rigby looks heartbroken for his friend. After this point, the episode makes it clear that what just happened is much more important than the outcome of the shootout, as it quickly ends with a fantastic gag.
School is overrated! I didn't go to school and look at me!
Thus brings us to the indie movie-esque ending of this one that I mentioned earlier, as it finishes with a quick rooftop conversation between a sulking Mordecai and a sympathetic Rigby, where, against a beautifully done sunset background, Rigby shows his friend the ultimate brospect.
You want to talk about it?
No.
While this episode is similar to a good chunk of the episodes in the show in structure and comedic quality, there is one key difference that makes it stand out from the rest, being that everything bad that happens to Mordecai in this episode isn't his fault. There's not a moment where you see him say something dumb or do something risky, and even the one time where he does something morally questionable and lying to Margaret about having to leave is arguably justifiable and doesn't really have any negative consequences. And while the issues with the counterfeit money is somebody's fault, being Pops for buying them and the animatronics for selling them, the main plot with Mordecai and Margaret ends with both of them being bummed out and neither of them having done anything wrong. Whereas almost every other episode before this, especially the ones about Margaret, have Mordecai and or Rigby doing something dumb and then having to face the consequences for it, this episode is all about how even if nobody messes up or has malintent, things just kinda suck sometimes. The episode doesn't end on this point though, as it instead shows how to deal with circumstances out of your control. While this final scene with Mordecai and Rigby is very short, there's a ton you can get out of it, as it attempts to deal with the immediate aftermath of the 10 minutes before it. First, Mordecai confirms that even after rejecting him, he didn't stop talking or get mad at Margaret, as he tells Rigby that he still took her to the airport. And while Mordecai is obviously the focus of this episode, it's a pretty rare good guy Rigby episode as well. And that's never as easy to see as in the final scene, where instead of trying to prick and prod Mordecai about what happened, he simply asks if he wants to talk and then sits in silence with him when he declines, as he truly serves as the epitome of the brospect that he mentioned throughout the episode. But more than anything, Mordecai shows the right way to handle faultless circumstances outside of your control. You just gotta hang out with friends and watch the sunset, because sometimes that's all you can do. So while Stake Me Amadeus isn't the funniest episode of Regular Show or have the best action of any Regular Show episode, it may just be the most real that the series ever gets, and that's what makes it a perfect episode, at least in my eyes. Anyway, that's about it for me. If you have an idea for another episode of Regular Show or any other cartoon I should talk about, leave it down in the comments. And if you want to see what I'm working on next, or just make fun of even more of my terrible animation opinions, my Twitter is somewhere in the description. Either way, this has been AmpleSamuel, and I'll see you in about a week with a video that's significantly less clickbaity. Thanks for watching.